My parents punished me with a $2,000 monthly fee that they considered proper discipline for being the eldest daughter. "Did you get paid today?" My mother's voice greeted me the moment I stepped through the front door, her words laden with expectation, not inquiry. "Yes, Mom," I answered, attempting to hide my weariness from my voice. It seemed as though nothing of the demanding work hours and burdensome daily responsibilities existed in her world, yet they all clung to me like a shadow. She couldn't see my hardships or my exhaustion. The paycheck was the only consideration. She answered, "Good. Make sure to give us the usual amount," without showing any sign of emotion. There was only a straightforward request. No appreciation for the hard-earned money I turned over every month, and no sense of thankfulness. I had been sending my parents $2,000 of my salary for 5 unrelenting years. This was neither a mutually agreed-upon arrangement, nor was it a voluntary act of support. No, that was just anticipated. They emphasized that it was my responsibility as the oldest daughter to make sure the family was well. Even though they pretended to be exercising discipline, it always felt like exploitation. My hardships were dismissed as unimportant, and my efforts were taken for granted. "Mom, I've been giving you money every month," I began, my voice quivering slightly as I attempted to find the strength to speak what had been kept deep inside for years. "But you never say thank you." She reacted with complete astonishment, as though the idea of thankfulness was alien to our family. "If you're working full-time and living at home, it's only natural you contribute. You should be grateful we raised you." With the weight of her words bearing down on me, I stood there. Years of passive compliance had taught me that questioning this arrangement was tantamount to disobedience. However, tonight I felt a stirring within of me that would not go away. The question remained in the air, shivering with the weight of all the hidden complaints. "I understand contributing," I started, my voice suddenly softer, almost imploring. "But isn't it unfair that I'm supporting all 3 of you while none of you work full-time?" From the living room, where my father sat quietly watching television, came his icy, contemptuous voice. "If you don't like it, you can move out, but good luck surviving on your own." Emily, my younger sister, was hardly looking up from her phone, but her smile told me everything I needed to know. With a sarcastic undertone, she replied, "Yeah, you'll find it hard out there." With each phrase, a knot tightened in my stomach. This was my family, individuals who ought to have taken care of me, but instead regarded me as a means of subsistence. I realized at that point that I could no longer live this way. There has to be a change. Shadows of childhood. Let me take you back to when it all began. Despite being 27 years old, I have never left my parents' house. My name is Alice. Living at home as an adult was, most people would suppose, a sign that I was dependent on my parents and that I clung to them either out of necessity or a fear of being independent. However, the truth is very different. Despite the fact that I've been working full-time for years, my family's demands have kept me here. You had to travel back in time to my youth, to the day my sister Emily was born, in order to fully comprehend how I came to be in this claustrophobic circumstance. When I was 7 years old, my environment had been rather steady and predictable. Even though Robert and Linda, my parents, weren't the most affectionate, they nevertheless took good care of me. That all changed the day Emily came into the world. My mother had looked down at the newborn in her arms and exclaimed, "She's such a cute baby. She's your sister, Alice," her eyes shining with happiness. "Being the older sister, I'll look out for her," I had excitedly said. I had no idea at the time what that duty would ultimately include. I very clearly recall my parents' excitement when Emily arrived. With her, my father, who had always been aloof toward me, became someone completely different. He would make her laugh, tease her, and show her love in a way I had never seen before. Emily's presence appeared to change my mother as well. She cared for Emily's every need with a tenderness that I had never experienced. However, something inside of me also changed. I wanted to love and protect Emily, so at first I was excited to take on the role of the big sister. However, as the months passed and Emily grew older, it became evident that my parents' adoration was now virtually exclusively for her. I started feeling invisible when I was 7 years old. I lost my workout bag one morning while getting ready for school. I tried not to sound scared as I inquired, "Mom, do you know where my gym bag is?" "You should prepare it yourself. Isn't it hung up where it usually is?" she said icily, not even taking her eyes off of Emily's food. Naturally, it wasn't where it typically was. I looked everywhere for it and finally found it, crumpled and forgotten, thrown into a drawer. My mother came in the doorway, her face severe, before I could wonder how it got there. She said, "What are you doing? The drawers are a mess." I mumbled, "I'm sorry, but I wasn't sure for what." "You require more attention than Emily," she reprimanded, sadly shaking her head. I suddenly recognized that my role in the family had changed at that point. I had become secondary to Emily, who was now the center of their universe, having previously been their only kid. No matter how tiny the mistake, I was always frustrated and impatient with myself. I had to be the mature, responsible person who didn't require special treatment. However, I was still a little child, and I felt a great deal of pressure from my parents. The distance between us increased as Emily grew. I started to feel more like an afterthought while she received an abundance of love and care. When I would make requests, no matter how minor, I would frequently encounter apathy or downright rejection. One day, with my heart pounding with envy as I watched Emily play with yet another new item, I questioned my dad. "Dad, did you buy a toy for Emily?" Without much thought, he said, "Yeah, I thought she'd like it." I responded, my voice almost audible above a whisper, "I'd want a toy too." "Next time, I'll get you one," he remarked curtly. I objected, adding before I could stop myself, "But you've been saying that for a while. It's always Emily." My father's face became serious. "What's not fair? I buy what I want to buy. And if you keep nagging, I won't buy you anything at all," he yelled. Emily started crying at that very moment as his voice reverberated throughout the home, and he hurried to comfort her. Emily's cries overshadowed my own pain and annoyance. I was standing there with my own tears on the verge of spilling over, but nobody seemed to notice. I learned that day onward to be private with my desires. I lacked the bravery to confront my parents, since they were too preoccupied with Emily to give a damn about what I wanted. My place in the family was set. I was Emily's assistant, the one who was supposed to be responsible and self-sufficient, while Emily was allowed to get lots of love and attention. Divorcing. Not only did my parents' attention change when Emily was born, I began to feel more and more alone, as though the connection that had once been between my parents and me had been broken. I guess it's normal for parents to give their newborn more attention, but it seemed like I had vanished from our home. I was on my own now, with Emily receiving all of the attention that had previously been saved for me. The disparities in our treatment increased in prominence as Emily grew older. Even though toys and gifts were undoubtedly a part of it, it wasn't simply the little things. It was the manner in which our parents interacted with us, attended to our needs, and made Emily feel important while making me feel like a burden. I once saw Emily asking my dad for a new dress she had her eye on in a magazine. "Dad, can you buy me this dress? I really like it," she said, holding the magazine up for him to see. He agreed without hesitation. "Of course, I'll talk to your mother about it." Emily threw her arms around him in a hug, beaming. "Thanks, Dad. You're the best." A terrible sensation descended into my chest as I observed this discussion. I hadn't made a request in a while, but I thought I would try after observing how effortlessly Emily obtained what she desired. I carefully said, "Dad, could I get something too?" not wanting to come across as demanding. With a fleeting glance in my direction, he added, "Be patient." The situation was settled, just like that. The words seemed to die in my throat. Arguing or attempting to clarify how unjust it all felt was pointless. Emily always got what she wanted, but I was urged to wait, to be patient, to accept that things weren't the same for me. I finally discovered that it's best to never ask for anything. It was pointless to wish for Emily's level of treatment. Our parents catered to her every whim as she grew older, leaving me more and more responsible for running the home. The weight of expectation. As I hit my teenage years, the dynamic in our household became even more distorted. With every year that went by, my parents' expectations of me increased, yet Emily remained their favorite child. Emily was allowed to enjoy her life carefree, but I was expected to assist out around the house and take on extra duties. Even though there were a lot of duties, it wasn't only those. The emotional strain and unceasing expectation to be the good daughter, the one who never grumbled, never asked for anything, and never got into trouble was the root of it. I considered my acceptance to university as my chance to finally achieve freedom. In an effort to save money, I had put a lot of effort into studying late into the night and juggling part-time jobs. My ultimate goal was to be independent and free from my family's controlling influence. But my folks were not at all encouraging when I mentioned the idea of moving out. One evening, while I waited for their response with my pulse thumping in my chest, I remarked, "I've been thinking about getting my own place when I start university." With a tone of disdain, my mother said, "Move out. Why would you want to do that?" My father said, "It's not safe for a young woman to live alone. Besides, we'd miss you." They were trying to sound sympathetic, but I knew they were lying. They would miss me if I moved out, thus they didn't want me to. They depended on me, thus they didn't want me to move out. Who would do the cooking without me, the tidying up, the clothes? For an instant, I thought about retaliating, saying that I was entitled to my own space and to live my own life. However, the dismay and despair on their expressions was enough to make me give up. I wasn't prepared to confront their rage or to let go just yet. I stayed as a result. A heavy lift. My escape was intended to be university, but that wasn't how things worked out. I was drawn more and more into the responsibilities of family life, rather than experiencing the freedom I had so desperately desired. I used to get up early every morning to make breakfast for my family before I would leave for campus. As I hurried to get everything ready, Emily, who is now a teenager, would stroll in and hardly acknowledge me as my father sat at the table, expectantly waiting for his lunch. My father would inquire, "What's for breakfast today?" as if it were my only duty to make sure he ate. "I haven't made it yet," I would respond, my weariness palpable. "What time do you think it is? Don't neglect your chores just because you're going to university." He would reprimand, his tone full of contempt. "You haven't made it yet." Emily had grown used to my devotion as well. She would chirp, "Good morning, sis. Is breakfast ready?" as if I were a housekeeper. I would dash to the kitchen, attempting to stay on top of my coursework, while frantically getting the toast in the toaster and the eggs on the burner. Regardless of my busy schedule, nobody offered assistance. They did nothing except wait for me to bring them something to eat. Breakfast was not the end of it, though. I would come home from school to a mountain of laundry, cooking, and cleaning to do. Emily was too busy enjoying her carefree life to help, and my parents did not help at all. As the months passed, I came to the conclusion that nothing would change. I was never going to be allowed to live my own life by my parents. All they needed from me was me, and I felt farther away than ever from any chance of independence. Financial chains. I thought things could finally get better when I got a career in sales after graduating from university. I thought that now that I had a steady job, I could start saving money, plan for the future, and maybe even move out. However, the bonds that kept me attached to my family simply got stronger. A casual remark from my father the day after I received my first paycheck chilled me to the bone. "So, what are you going to buy us with your paycheck?" he inquired, as though it were normal for my labor-intensive funds to end up in their coffers. I didn't know if he was serious as I looked at him. "What do you mean?" he said, as if I had no say in the matter. "Your mother and I have already been talking about it. We've got a few things in mind." Emily even chimed in, her voice beaming with enthusiasm. "I want something too. Big sis, don't forget about me." My first paycheck should have been a cause for celebration, but instead it became a family debate about what they wanted. It felt as like my money didn't belong to me, and I didn't exist. For the first few months, I tried to accommodate their requests. They were my family, after all, and I wanted to be a decent daughter. However, as the months went by, their hopes increased. They stopped bothering to ask me for particular items. Rather, they insisted on money I had earned through many hours of labor, and that I was entitled to keep for myself. In less than a year, I was paying them almost my entire paycheck, leaving me very little left over to support myself. I was unable to afford new clothes, simple indulgences, or even going out with friends. My life turned into a never-ending cycle of labor and service to my family. The breaking point. On the surface, the day everything changed was just like any other. After a long and tiring day at work, I arrived home late to find Emily seated at the table, finishing the last of the pudding I had kept for myself. I responded in a low voice, attempting to hide my annoyance. That was mine. Unfazed, Emily looked up. "There's more in the fridge." However, it wasn't. She had consumed it all without giving it any attention. A part of me broke. It was about everything, not just the pudding. The years of being disregarded and expected to take care of the family without even receiving a thank you. Years of selfless giving that ended up being exploited. That's when I knew I couldn't continue living this way. Giving my all to a family that didn't value or care about me was not something I could continue to do. I needed to get away. Asking for assistance. The company has just started providing counseling services to staff members at work. I didn't initially plan to go, but it was a voluntary attendance. What was the point after all? My issues weren't at work, they were at home. However, I felt compelled to schedule a session for some reason. Perhaps I always knew I needed assistance. The counselor, Sarah, was a nice woman who questioned me about my life, career, and relationships. I initially gave a general response since I didn't want to dive into specifics. But then something changed when she inquired about my family. I started talking to her nonstop, and before I realized it, I was sharing everything. With a quiver in my voice, I said, "I give my parents the most of my salary. I do all the household chores, and they expect me to. They've never thanked me, not once." With understanding in her eyes, Sarah listened calmly. She remarked something that really got under my skin when I was done. "This amounts to financial abuse," she remarked quietly. Unsure if I had heard her right, I blinked. "Abuse?" "Yes," she answered. "Your family is taking advantage of you financially. You're being exploited, and it's not right." Her words hit me like a tidal wave. It never occurred to me to think of it that way. I had always thought of myself as just doing what it took to be a daughter, that I had to give and give without asking anything in return. However, after learning the term abuse, I understood that what was taking place wasn't typical. It wasn't equitable. With a tiny, unsure voice, I said, "What can I do?" "You must establish boundaries," Sarah remarked softly. "You need to prioritize yourself and your own well-being. Have you ever considered moving out?" The choice. Sarah's remark stuck in my head during the train ride home that evening. Misuse of money. Limitations. Putting myself first. I had been prioritizing my family's demands over my own for so long that I had forgotten what it was like to put my own needs first. However, I was confident of one thing. I couldn't carry on living this way. My mother was there to greet me that evening as I entered the house. As customary. Without making small talk, she inquired, "Did you deposit your paycheck yet?" With my heart racing in my chest, I fixed my gaze on her. "Why do you ask me that every time?" I asked, maintaining a steady tone while expressing a subtle urgency in my voice. She blinked, surprised by my tone. "It's only natural. You live here, you contribute." Taking a little tone up, I said, "And in all these years, have you ever thanked me for it?" She rehearsed her comments as if she had been repeating them for years. "If you're working full-time and living at home, it's only natural for you to contribute. You should be grateful we raised you," she added. "I comprehend my contribution," I stated in a composed yet unwavering tone. "But isn't it wrong that I'm supporting all three of you while you're not working full-time?" Observing my change, she squinted her eyes and said, "We work, but not full-time. Are you saying part-time jobs don't count?" My father interrupted me from the living room before I could reply. "So you want to use all the money you earn without repaying your parents? If you don't want to contribute, you can't live here." Emily grinned as she sat there. "Yeah, good luck living on your own. You'll come crawling back." But this time, I didn't back down. "I'm leaving," I stated firmly. "A fresh start." I packed up my belongings and left the house that had served as both my home and my prison that evening. I ignored my parents' attempts to stop me and begged me to stay. I was done making decisions. My life was over because of them. The first few weeks on my own were hard, filled with periods of doubt and fear. But as time went on, I started to experience a freedom and sense of calm that I had never experienced before. I was living for me for the first time in my life. Onward motion. A few weeks after I moved out, my phone rang. My mother was there. With a desperate tone in her voice, she added, "Alice, we're struggling. We need your help." "I apologize," I uttered, my heart sorrowful yet determined. "Please come back. We can't make ends meet without you," she pleaded. "I hope you find work soon," I remarked in a stern yet composed tone. I hung up the phone after that. I felt liberated for the first time in my life, and I was not turning around. Reclaiming my life. Living alone wasn't always simple for me. There were days when the quiet in my new apartment was unbearable, and I felt like I had too much responsibility. But I started to rebuild gradually. I made new friends, caught up with old ones, and relished pastimes I had long since forgotten. When I thought back on the years I lived with my parents, I was struck by how much of who I had given up to live up to their expectations. I had been so accustomed to being the dutiful sister and the ideal daughter that I had forgotten who I was. But at last, I had the freedom to find out. And I felt really joyful for the first time in a very long time. I was free of the bonds that had held me back for so long. I was free from the oppressive weight of my family's expectations and no longer felt their stifling strain. It was a feeling I never wanted to lose, living my life on my terms. I was aware that the future will present problems, but I also knew that I had the strength to overcome them. I had endured years of financial and emotional abuse after all. I'd escaped a life that had almost ruined me. I could now at last enjoy a free life.